Hello. Hi, Caitlin. Hi, Kristen. How are you guys? Morning, morning. So little change of plans, at least to begin with. I had a kind of like, I don't know, if it's a breakthrough. It was good. I went to meet some friends for dinner over the weekend. Went and ran some errands, saw my sister yesterday, so it was nice, got out and about a little bit. And then did some studying on trauma bonding. So that was cool to see. So you know how I had gotten that phone call from my mom, and how I kind of went into that, like, I don't know. I was traumatized, basically, right, by the phone call, and I had recognized my body was in freeze, and I, like, worked through that, right? But I came out of it, right? Like, I'm good, I'm better, but I wasn't, like, happy with that. Like, I'm like, I want to know why after all this time I had a response like I did to a phone call, right? So I was asking God, like, what was that all about? I want to know what that was all about. And he told me trauma bonding. Now, I've heard about trauma bonding a lot in the past, but I never actually researched it. So I did some research on it, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what was happening. So I want to share some about trauma bonding with you. And then I also want to give you some coping mechanisms when you're going through healing. Because as we go into this book more, there's some things that I was getting triggered by reading it, okay? And I don't want you guys getting triggered and then not knowing how to deal with it, right? So we're going to do those two things, and then we'll see with the book, like, how much time we have. Because I don't want to, give you too much info at once. All right, so he told me trauma bonding. So I'm going to just share the research that I did and what that means, and how we can work through that. All right. So trauma bonding is a combination of abuse and positive reinforcement. That is what causes the trauma bond. Hold on, let me pray. God, please be with me today, be able to explain the things that I've been learning. Help us to all be able to absorb it and understand it. If it's something that takes place within our lives, help us to be able to work through it, so that we're not carrying the feelings of others, so that we're not bonded to them in an unhealthy way. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. It's better. Okay, so trauma bonding is a combination of abuse and positive reinforcement, which is what causes the bond. So there is dopamine, which is the good, it's a feel-good chemical, right, within us. And then there's cortisol, which is a stress-induced chemical. So when you are in an abusive situation where there's reinforcement and abuse, right? So you're going through the abuse and your cortisol levels go up, and you want to get out of that feeling. So then you need to go for the dopamine hit, right? So the way you do that in an abusive situation is by pleasing the abuser. So it's an endless cycle then of going into that's fight, flight, freeze, right? That's where that comes in too. You are being hurt, you're feeling bad, you need to fix it, you go take care of the abuser. So it's hard to break because it becomes your coping mechanism, right? So when you feel bad, you are trained basically to go please the abuser, and that's how you stop feeling bad. So when you're in that, especially say you're raised in childhood like that, that becomes your coping mechanism. So that's the only way you really know how to truly, well, it feels like truly making yourself happy, right? So that's how you would get rid of that pain. You make them happy. So as adults, victims feel great empathy and are protective over the abusive parent. So empathy, because I thought, you can only have empathy if you've actually experienced what somebody else has, right? But I guess that is not the case. So it's possible to have empathy without experiencing the same things as someone else. There are different types of empathy, including cognitive empathy, which is the ability to understand another person's perspective without sharing the experience. So cognitive is understanding the person's feelings and perspective without experiencing it yourself. It involves imagining what it might be like in that situation. For example, you might be able to understand how someone feels after losing a job, even if you haven't experienced that yourself. Then there's emotional empathy. This is the ability to share another person's feelings. It can include feeling the same emotions as someone else or experiencing distress in response to their situation. And then there's compassionate empathy. It's a combination of the cognitive and the emotional, where you both understand and feel another person's emotions. So, that can be a good thing in the aspect of having compassion for others and what they're going through, right? But when it's enmeshed within abusive situations, it's not a healthy thing, because then, I guess, like for me, I took on the feelings that the abuser should have had, right? Because let's say like in my abusive situation, it was a victim mentality, right? This person was a victim, and I was raised to believe they were a victim, which, I mean, they did have circumstances where they were, so there was some truth in that. But then just because of how unhealthy she was, it's like I was feeling emotions that I shouldn't have taken on, right? I was being empathetic to a fault, I guess. So it says empathy is a key part of morality and successful relationships, okay? So it is a good thing. It helps people understand other perspectives. Empathy is triggered by many things, including vocalizations, facial expressions, and body posture. It's often described as imagining yourself in another situation. So let me see here. So then, so let's say it's a parent, right? The parent practices a pattern of withholding love mixed with random acts of affection and reward. This causes the child to seek their abuser's approval. Okay, so let me take you through this because this is steps. This is how it went down. So I'm like, okay, trauma bond. God said trauma bond is what the issue was. I'm researching that, right? It says that it's about the dopamine hit, right? It could be about the dopamine hit. But I'm like, I don't think that's my case because it's been so many years that we've been distant now. I'm not in stress mode all the time, right? I don't need a dopamine hit by making her happy, right? So I'm like, no, I don't think that's it for me, right? And then it says it's a coping mechanism, right? To get rid of pain. And I'm like, well, I'm not in pain anymore. I am pretty peaceful and happy in my life, right? So I don't feel like I need to go make her happy so that I can be happy, right? So I'm like, all right, I don't know. Maybe then I started thinking, well, maybe this wasn't a message for me. Maybe it was for somebody else. But I'm still going to do it, right? So I kept researching. So then I got to this part. So the random withholding love mixed with random acts of affection and reward. This causes the child to seek their abuser's approval. And that's when it hit me. And I was like, that's what it is. I'm doing something, these videos, right, that would be not approved of at all. It would be a horrible, horrible thing if I was still in that situation and doing this. So I did not get approval. So she happened to call when I started doing these videos. So that initially, then all of a sudden I went into freeze state, right? Of fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And I went into freeze. So I didn't understand why I was going into freeze, but that is what happened. So I started noticing like my body, right? My abdomen was tight. My shoulders and my neck were like killing me. They were so tense. And so I recognized something's going on with me. So I noticed that, right? So we got to notice when something's going on with our bodies, or our anxiety's kicked up or something. What's going on? You got to recognize it, okay? So like that's the first step in your healing, is recognize things about yourself and your body. So I had recognized I was in freeze, right? Freeze is a physiological response to a threat, okay? So my body felt like a threat was going on. Even though there was no threat, my body was still responding like there was one. So it's a response to a threat where a person is unable to move or act, but is highly alert. So like, that is exactly how I was feeling. Like I was feeling like paralyzed. Not like I was moving around my house and stuff, but within I felt paralyzed. Like I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what move to make. Do I call back? Do I not call back? Like why, and I was freaking out. And then PTSD kicks in, right? So, because you're highly alert, something as simple as like my daughter walking into the room will make me jump and like yelp. So it's like there's a threat around me, but there actually isn't. It's stemming from the past when there was a threat. So I recognized, I was like, okay, what triggered this, right? So that means we were triggered. So if we're not in an abusive situation anymore, and we're not dealing with that, that means we were triggered. So I recognized that the phone call is what triggered me. And I started to feel guilty. And so I had to then do like self-therapy, right? Therapy is a great tool You go talk to somebody, they can help guide you through stuff, they can help you learn about things like this. However, the main point I have gotten out of therapy are the tools that you have to do this on your own, okay? And that is the whole reason I'm doing this, because I did a lot of self-therapy. So when I recognized that my body was acting like it was, when I recognized that it was due to the phone call, then I had to start asking myself questions. So I asked myself questions like, are you doing anything wrong? And I really thought it out, right? And so I came to the determination, no, I am not doing anything wrong by doing these videos. Am I being as honorable towards my parent as possible, even with talking about these things? And I do feel like I am being as honorable as I can. I've even shared, I understand where she was coming from, and I understand why she acted like she did. However, it still was traumatic, right? So you got to work through that. So I asked myself these questions that I needed to ask myself so that I could get myself back into a place of being secure, knowing where I am and where I stand as an adult in my life now. And so I came to the understanding for myself, this is something that is necessary. This is something I'm being called to do. I'm doing it in as respectful of a way as I can. And I'm not doing anything wrong by doing it, right? So then I wasn't okay with just letting that go, though, even though I felt like I was fine again. I wanted to know why this had happened, so that's why I had asked God what was going on. And so then when he told me trauma bonding, I did the research. So that was another big piece of my healing, was I did a lot of research, right? And like I said, God will guide you. Hi, Michelle. Talking about trauma bonding. So I started doing the research then on trauma bonding. So like I said, I've heard about that a lot in the past, but I have not actually researched it. So as I was researching it, I was like, that's exactly, I checked all the boxes in the past, right? A lot of it now I am not dealing with, except for that piece that came up. So basically researching and helping yourself in that way is finding truth, right? So my body had gone into freeze, and then once I sorted all that out and recognized the truth, I'm not doing anything wrong, everything's okay, I went into, I believe, fawn. So fawn then, it says, like I started thinking about her feelings over mine, right? I started to feel sadness. I wanted to fix things. Like I felt like I wanted to fix things. I want to make her happy, right? So that's all stemming from this trauma bond thing. With the whole, like, the coping mechanism, right? To make myself feel better, you would go and make sure that the abuser's happy, right? And you get that dopamine hit. So all of that was coming into play because your body and your mind doesn't understand, like that phone call was a threat to my body and my mind. Even though I know in the physical it's not a threat, my body doesn't understand that that's a memory, that's a past thing. Like it thinks of it as a current, present threat, right? And that's why we want to heal our emotions and we want to heal our minds and work through these things, because then when things happen, like getting a phone call from somebody who used to abuse you, you're not going to be thrown into that turmoil because you're going to have worked through all of your trauma and your body won't perceive that phone call as a threat anymore. Hopefully that makes sense. So fawning causes confusion and guilt. Your instinct drives you to soothe the abuser. So again, instinct, things in the past that actually happened that are no longer a thing in my life, but yet my body, my mind, my emotions wanted to do that. So it goes back to trauma bonding with the coping mechanism, making them happy, getting approval to make the pain go away. Happy, that person being happy equals me being happy, but that's not true. Okay, so once I went through this stuff, right? I recognized something's going on with my body. I was triggered. What triggered me? The phone call. Then I asked myself questions to put myself in proper perspective of the present and what's going on. Then I did research based on God sharing trauma bonding. I found out all that truth about trauma bonding and how my body and my mind used to be programmed to take care of this person. And then, you feel better and your body starts to relax and it starts to come out of fight, flight, freeze. And then I comforted myself. So this is if you're going through and you're researching these things or you're doing some therapy on yourself and you're getting feelings of like fear are coming up or you're getting nervous, whatever you're starting to feel because you're tapping into dealing with these memories, dealing with the things that have been done, there's ways to comfort yourself and recover through each thing, right? So I think I've shared with you guys when I was seeing a counselor, she was doing this to try to connect me to my little girl, right? Because I was disconnected from her. So to try to connect her, and she had made some suggestions. Now I believe connected. I have connected to my inner child, to that little girl that went through. It's no longer that little girl, that was me, right? So I'm able to connect in that way. However, I still feel like when I go through things like this, that I need the comfort like a child would need, right? And it's helpful. So she said to get a baby or a stuffed animal. And when you think about that with a child, a lot of children have like a favorite stuffy or something and they carry it around everywhere. They have that blankie that they carry around, right? That's a comfort to them. And so I got my rabbit. I had told you guys before, right? Katie, this is Katie. So, man, I got her maybe like 8 years ago or something. Like even just holding her right now, it feels nice, right? It's filling that, it's comforting that inner child that's within us, right? And God says, right, we're supposed to be innocent like children. So this is a way to connect to your child, right? And when I'm feeling sad or scared or I'm going through high emotions and I'm working through this stuff, just holding her helps. And her ears are very good for wiping my tears, right? So as I was comforting myself, holding her, I was curled up in bed. I allowed myself a day to just lay around and I watched movies. Sometimes I'll bake. I don't know, there's something with my little girl and baking, and so that will calm me down. Lighting a candle, taking an Epsom salt bath, deep breathing, that's a big one. Like, That right there just calmed down my body. You know, it doesn't take long to be able to calm your body once you get used to doing things, right? I think because like I was literally focusing on the breath, right? And you hold it for a little bit. So you breathe in, you hold it, and then you breathe it out slowly. It's definitely helpful in calming your body. I have a biblical meditation app, so I'll do that. Or I have like a healing worship playlist, so it's like mellow worship. There's actually a guy on TikTok I've shared with some of you. He reads children's books at night. That was another thing that the counselor had suggested to connect and comfort the inner child is to read children's books. So I did, as I was going through this high intensity of emotions that I was feeling, I watched him a couple times and I listened to him read the book, and I just really looked at the pictures and I really, paid attention. So that was helpful. Hugging somebody, so you have healthy people around you. I told my daughter, I said, I need a oxytocin, kick or whatever, and I gave her a hug, a nice hug, because we have talked about that kicks up the oxytocin, right, which is another feel-good, comforting type of chemical within us, and it's through physical touch that we enact that. A pet, that's why a lot of people have pets, right? They call them their therapy pet, their animal. It's comforting to pet an animal, to hug, and reaching out to somebody. If you have anybody healthy in your life, and you just need to talk, that's another thing. There's also grounding. So like, say your anxiety's really kicked up, and some people, like, you feel like you're gonna have a panic attack or something, right? Grounding yourself is bringing yourself back into the present. So using your senses, like touching the table and feeling how hard it is, smelling your environment and noticing what it smells like. So you need to maybe carry around, I had seen, like, carry around an object that like kind of brings you comfort that you can hold on to when you're feeling anxious and you're out and about. So grounding yourself, bringing yourself back into the present so that you're not, because like I said, your body doesn't understand that you're out of the trauma and that's no longer an imminent threat. It takes it as it is an actual threat. Yes, magnesium's awesome. That's why I do the Epsom baths, right? And lavender essential oil. I'll take that kind of bath, and most of the time, if I'm really trying to bring myself down, it's very relaxing. I could show them to you another day, but they're called Calm Restore. They have lavender, chamomile, and skullcap in them. And I get those from a holistic nurse down the street from me. And those are very helpful. Drinking teas is another thing. Like, I'll drink, chamomile tea, or I have passion flower is another one that's helpful in anxiety. So I have an extract that I got off Amazon. And I'll put some passion flower extract in like my sparkling water. So yeah, those are two that I've used and currently use. But I'm sure if we research, there's probably others too. But yeah, those seem to work pretty well for me. Because too, I am used to numbing, right? So like my go-to is always drinking. So once I stopped drinking, I think it's like 2.5 years now, I stopped going for the alcohol, and I now take my lavender capsules. But it still helps. It's good. um, so as I was researching this stuff too, I noticed, I said, oh, isn't that ironic? Like, I feel like God's calling me to do this, right? And so I start doing it. And of course, Satan doesn't want me doing it because it could help other people, right? He doesn't want us doing that. And it's still helping me. It's still helping me understand, obviously, like trauma bonding. I never researched that before. And here this was something that was a part of my life for so long. So getting educated on these things. He doesn't want us being educated. He doesn't want us helping to educate other people. But God used it for my good, right? So that phone call, the enemy meant for stopping me, because my initial thought was take down all the videos and stop talking about it, right? And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So I worked through it. So God used it for good because I worked through it. And I actually have it down now in steps, because I was like, God, I'm really having a hard time. Like, I went through all this healing, but I really don't know how to explain it, right? So actually, as I went through this, I was able to write down the steps of how I go through healing trauma as it comes up, right? So I know God's working, and he used it for my good. And so it's awesome. Don't let the enemy stop you from doing something because of fear, because yeah, if God's telling you to do something, do it. So let's see. I want to see. I had save some articles here. So here, let me start with, I have a lot of stuff here. Again, if you want some of this stuff, I had bookmarked articles on PTSD and what that is, because it's helpful to understand what these things are. Trauma bonding. Trauma bonding took me a while. I didn't really understand as I was reading about it, like how that connected with me. But then after watching some videos and doing some more research, then it started to connect, right? So it's good to look through these things. So trauma bonding, I have the role of empathy in trauma bonding, and then what fight, flight, freeze, and fawn mean. So those are all things that came up in this round of healing for me. So if you want these things, I can send them to you. My email is worshipnight, WORSHIP, worshipnight@yahoo.com. So like the surprising role of empathy in traumatic bonding. Traumatic bonding refers to the development of a powerful emotional attachment between victims and abusers. It made me think about how like people say they're an empath. I've never liked that word. It just never felt good to me, like that word, for some reason. And I didn't know why. But as I'm reading this, empathy is a traumatic bonding tool, right? It's how the abuser gets you bonded to them. New research demonstrates that empathy from an abuser may increase the likelihood of the traumatic bonding, despite its benefits, because it is, like we had talked about, it is beneficial to be empathetic, try to be in another person's shoes so you can understand what they're going through and have that sympathy, right? But in an abusive situation, it's not good, So despite its many benefits, empathy can be maladaptive when it is used by victims to justify or excuse the abuse they suffer. So that was another thing that I had noticed, like I was always defending the abuse. I didn't see it as abuse, and I defended it. And that's because I was so enmeshed emotionally that I was actually experiencing what the other person was experiencing like it was my own. That's not healthy. We don't want to do that. So yeah, if you want these articles, let me know, because there's a bunch of stuff in here and I don't want to read through all of it to you right now. And, it's good to have the stuff in front of you so you can take your time understanding it. So with all that said, we're on profiles of an abuser. And I wanted to, share with you guys like how I went through that healing recently, but also give you those tools, because I'm not going to read all of this, but I mean, it is triggering. If you've been through things, you've been abused growing up, or, even just in your adult life, it can be triggering. And, when if you start getting triggered with something, you want to stop, take a break, right? And go ahead and take care of yourself, self-soothe, and, comfort yourself. So I'm not going to read all of this because it's actually a lot. If you would like the pages, I am willing to copy them and email them to you. Again, just let me know, and I will do that. And then you can go ahead and you can read as much of it as you want, because you'll know how you're feeling as you're reading through it. All right. So, profiles of abusers. If you don't know, we're using Mending the Soul by Stephen R. Tracy. We've gone over, I think this is the 3rd chapter, so we've gone through 2 chapters. It just went through what types of abuse there are. I don't think he hit on every abuse, but he hit on a lot of them. I have videos on my YouTube of the past chapters, so if you want to look at those, go ahead and go to YouTube. My link's on my TikTok. So we're on the profile part now. So he's going over how there was this man who had abused some kids. And so they're in court about it. And who had abused some kids. And so they're in court about it. So what I found most amazing was the logic used by this guy's defenders in court. Several told reporters he couldn't possibly be guilty of this crime because he was such a nice guy who helped many people in the community. One elderly neighbor recounted how he had shoveled her sidewalk one winter, something she was quite sure a child molester would never do. After much questioning by the reporter regarding John's guilt or innocence, that's crazy. John was the first guy that had abused me. Regarding John's guilt or innocence, one exasperated defender declared, "Just look at this man. Look at his face. Anybody with half a brain can see he's not a child molester." This instinctual response is one of the most common myths regarding abusers, namely that you'll know one when you see one. It's very disturbing to discover that this comforting bromide has no factual basis. In 1960, the Israelis captured Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann and put him on trial for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The New Yorker magazine sent philosopher and writer Hannah Arendt or something to Jerusalem to cover the trial. Her reaction upon seeing Eichmann for the first time was one of shock, because as she looked into his face, into the face of this indescribably evil man, she did not recognize evil. So when she looked at him, she did not see evil. She mused that his deeds were monstrous, but the doer appeared quite ordinary and commonplace. As she continued to reflect on Eichmann, she coined a phrase to describe him: the banality of evil. It is highly disturbing to realize that evil abusers often have a banal, which is obvious or boring, quality to their existence. And what stands out about banality, by definition, is that it does not stand out. Thus, what is exceptional about abusers is their commonness. So abusers come from all strata of society. For instance, several years ago, the U.S. Customs Office undertook a large child porn, I don't know what I can say on this, sting operation. They arrested dozens of men and in process documented approximately 60 different professions represented among the defendants. The list read like a vocational cross-section of American society. There are attorneys, butchers, music teachers, janitors, funeral home directors, salesmen, police officers, farmers, graphic artists, defense contractors, school bus drivers, and the list goes on, right? So abusers cannot be predicted by race, occupation, demeanor, education level, or facial features, right? So that's a myth that you know one when you see one. So then if we aren't able to know one when we see one, how do we look for it? So now he's going to go over 4 general characteristics of abusers, and then he's going to briefly explain 6 kinds of abusers. All right. So again, I'm not going to read all of this for each piece. I'm just going to read some of it. All right, so general characteristics of abusers. First one, pervasive denial of responsibility. The single most consistent characteristic we've seen in abusers is their utter unwillingness to accept full responsibility for their behavior. I have rarely seen abusers confess to abuse unless there was a crystal clear, overwhelming evidence of their behavior. And even then, they typically minimize what they had done and shift the blame. So that makes me think of the garden, right? When Adam and Eve went against what God told them, right? And they ate from that tree, they participated with the enemy, right? They shifted blame. Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the serpent, right? So we want to shift that blame. So that's what an abuser will do, is try to shift the blame, even if there's hardcore proof and evidence. So over and over with Adolf Eichmann, during his trial, he kept saying that it wasn't his fault because he was simply following orders. Okay, so that's how he was trying to shift the blame. And it also helps them to not feel the shame that they should be feeling, right? They kind of like blocking that out because they're like, well, it's not really my fault. Some will blame victims for dressing seductively. Some will, it says physical abusers blame family members for making them mad. What made this, skipping that part. So similarly, spiritual abusers customarily offer biblical justification for their abuse. When caught red-handed, they will, if pressed to the wall, admit to some inappropriate behavior, but will fixate on the sins of the other person. I've gone through that with my situation, where if I were to bring up the truth about something and want to talk about that, the other person would bring up something that I do wrong, because they're trying to, again, shift that blame and also shift the focus off of themselves, right? So no accountability. Sorry, I'm just looking over. I wanna highlight some stuff, but I don't want to. I honestly don't know if I can even say all of this stuff online, right? So that's, again, if you want copies of this, I'm willing to send it to you. It's probably like 5-6 pages for this piece. But yeah, so I'm being careful about what I'm saying here. All right, so let's see. Abusers reach their... All right, so these quotes, so he had given some quotes like, I never beat my wife, I respond physically to her. On some occasions, she was the provoker. You know, you're married for that long. If somebody gets antagonistic, you want to defend yourself. So going over all these like defenses that abusers will have and what they'll say. So these quotes demonstrate the extreme break with reality abusers reach in their pervasive denial of responsibility. Christian leaders must recognize this dynamic lest they buy into the abuser's lies and contribute to victim blaming. Furthermore, abusers must be held to the highest level of accountability, nothing less than total ownership for their behavior should be accepted by the churches. Anything less than total accountability contributes to their denial and in essence justifies their sin. And that's enabling, right? That's enabling the abuser to stay in their state of denial, and it helps them to continue to abuse. When we do not call it out, right? When we make excuses for it, that is helping them to be able to continue, which is also hurting them, right? It's not just hurting the ones they're abusing, it's hurting them. God tells us, He shows us, right? He has told us that we need to be accountable, that we are to fess up to the things that we have done wrong. And the reasoning for that is because that helps us to grow into what God created us to be. It helps us to get closer to God. It helps us to have that guilt taken away, right? And it helps us to change our behavior when we confess and repent. So that is the goal. And it's scary to be truthful. It's scary to stand up to somebody, right? But it's possible. So justifying the wicked is considered an abomination to God. I had thought of something, first few years of my walk, God was so serious about confessing your sin, right? That He actually, I told you, it was unfortunately abusive in my childhood, and my mom is the main person to do with that. And so God was telling me to confess some things that I had done wrong as a teen. And I was like, really? Like, I'm like say I would go out, stay out all night and not let her know where I was. She'd be paging me. I had pager back then, right? She'd be paging me. I turned it off. So I scared her, right? You get scared when your children are gone overnight and they don't tell you where they are. And she knew I was drinking and doing drugs, right? So all of that on her as a mom is a scary thing, right? And so stuff like that, he was like, apologize. He wanted me to apologize for that, you know, and confess that it was wrong. And I was like, really? Because I felt like it was justified. The reason I was drinking and doing drugs is because of what was going on at home. So I was, right, blame shifting. It's because of her that I was doing these things, but yet we're accountable to our actions. I didn't have to do those things, you know what I mean? So I ended up being like, all right, fine. I get it. It's to help me to let go of any guilt that was upon me for my actions, right? So it's not about how she is as a person, how she was treating people. It's about me and how I was, right? So I did end up writing her a letter, which was one of the hardest, most humbling things that he had me do in the beginning of my walk, was that I wrote a letter to her apologizing for those types of things that I put her through. It did not say it was okay for how, you know, she was. It was saying that I was wrong in what I did, and I'm sorry I put unnecessary pain on her through those actions. So yes, God is very serious about us owning up to our stuff, and we cannot sit there and justify the things that we do wrong based on other people's actions. So justifying the wicked is considered an abomination to God. Proverbs 17:15. So now he's going into scripture. So I like this, that he's using a lot of scripture in this part. So when Nathan the prophet confronted King David for his evil abuse, he held him fully accountable for his action. He did not entertain a discussion of how Bathsheba was partially responsible for bathing on the roof, or how the servants were somewhat to blame for bringing Bathsheba to David when they knew he was having a midlife crisis. Nathan boldly declared, "You are the man." David responded without qualification, "I have sinned against the Lord." So he didn't give him any excuses. He literally was like, you did something wrong and you need to own up to it. And David got it and he said, I own up to it. I was wrong. Conversely, David's predecessor, King Saul, gives one of the clearest examples in all of Scripture of the extremes to which abusers will go to avoid taking responsibility for their sins. Saul attempted to kill his own son, Jonathan, to cover up his own foolishness, but the people prevented Saul from doing so. In 1 Samuel 14. Saul later assaulted David with a deadly weapon and repeatedly attempted to kill him. The turning point in Saul's life occurred when God commanded him to destroy the evil Amalekites, I may be saying that wrong, and to save nothing, not even livestock. Saul partially obeyed by attacking and defeating them, but he kept the choicest spoil and did not kill their king as he was commanded. The amazing part of the story is that when Samuel came to Saul, it's making me do this puzzle piece to keep this live going. Okay. All right, we're back. Okay, the amazing part of the story is that when Samuel came to Saul after the battle, Saul greeted him by declaring that he had carried out the Lord's command. A bald-faced distortion he actually seemed to believe. Abusers can get so caught up in their denial that they lose touch with reality. When Samuel confronted him with the facts, Saul cleverly explained that they had destroyed everything as God commanded, except for the best livestock, which they planned to offer to the Lord as a sacrifice. Lies. Notice the way the abuser can use religion to justify their sin. Samuel confronted Saul with his disobedience, telling him he had done an evil thing. Samuel asked, "Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord, but rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord?" Saul insisted that he had obeyed, but that the people had disobeyed. So now he's blame shifting. "I did obey the voice of the Lord, but the people took some of the spoil." At this point, Saul resorted to blame shifting, one of the abuser's favorite tactics. Only after being persistently confronted with the facts of his disobedience did Saul acknowledge his sin. So it's important we keep putting that truth in front of the person, right? If we are still in relationship with the person, we have to keep pointing it out and not let them be in denial over it and blame shift. Even then, he was more concerned about saving face than about the way he had dishonored God. Saul pleaded, "I have sinned, but please honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel." After this incident, Samuel didn't go to see Saul again, but he grieved over Saul's tragic moral condition. Saul's pervasive denial of responsibility is characteristic of virtually all abusers. Vulnerable adults and those who are responsible for protecting minors must recognize this powerful denial dynamic and courageously battle it. And I'm pretty sure, correct me if you know and I'm wrong, but I think Saul is the one where his heart kept getting harder, right? And then it said, like, God made his heart hard, Saul made his heart hard. God made his heart hard, right? And it's because of all this, like the denial and, blame shifting. When we're doing that stuff and that's how we're operating, we're getting farther from God, right? And then we come out of reality and we start to believe the things we're telling ourselves, right? And so our hearts start to get hard, and we don't want that. Let's see, it's been an hour. All right. I think I will go over one more, and then we can continue tomorrow. Because I know I started out with the trauma bonding, and that was a lot of information too. So we don't want to overwhelm because we want to actually get stuff out of this, right? All right, so the next one is bold deceitfulness. So this is another profile for an abuser. So the first one was, we actually went through quite a few pages already, was denial of responsibility, right? So the second one is bold deceitfulness. So closely connected with the abuser's unwillingness to own his or her destructive behavior is bold deceitfulness, a skill abusers need in order to maintain their innocence, avoid the discomfort of changing long-established patterns of behavior, escape the painful consequences of their actions, and assuage their own nagging conscience. It is impossible for somebody who abuses others to not have guilt, right? We all have a conscience. We were all created by God, and we have that moral compass right off the bat. That's how we know right from wrong, right? And so it is impossible that they're not feeling guilt or shame. But in order for us to get rid of that, right, we remedy the wrong. We say we were wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And that's how we get rid of that. But because abusers need to keep doing the abuse because they're getting something from it and fulfilling a need that they think they have, instead of healing, they are going ahead and doing that. They have to somehow make themselves feel better, right? And since they're not doing the actual thing that could actually lift that from them, they need to do it in these ways. So families, congregations, and secular leaders often find the audacity and persuasiveness of abusers' deceitfulness to be overwhelming. Abusers can be masterful at manipulating words and actions to confuse, confound, and put others on the defensive. Sorry, I have a bug. I'm in my garage. There's a bug crawling towards me. All right. So there are biblical examples of such bold deceit, particularly in 2 Samuel 11. After David took advantage of Bathsheba, the unmistakable physical evidence, her pregnancy, signaled his sinful behavior. Instead of repenting of his sin and taking the appropriate steps of correction and restitution, David sought to cover his tracks by bringing Bathsheba's husband home from battle so he could have relations with his wife. David deceitfully pretended to have called Uriah, which was her husband, home so David could get news of the battle and honor Uriah. We read, David asked concerning the welfare of Joab and the people of the state of the war, in verse 7. This was a sham, of course. David was fixated on his own welfare, not the people's. When David sent Uriah home and encouraged him to have relations with his wife, he sent him a gift. The irony is that David had already stolen a most precious gift from Uriah. What breathtaking, bold deception, showering gifts and kindness on the very man whose wife he impregnated. When Uriah's loyalty to his soldiers prevented him from going to his wife, David plied him with wine to get him drunk, thinking it would serve as a necessary disinhibiting aphrodisiac. When that failed, David took advantage of Uriah's godly character. Knowing that Uriah was fiercely loyal to God and to the king, David had Uriah carry the very sealed message containing instructions for his own murder. The message read, "Place Uriah in the front line of the fiercest battle and withdraw from him, so that he may be struck down and die." Abusers are often very cunning, and they deceitfully prey on the very virtues of those they abuse, counting on the fact that their victims will not act treacherously as they do. The message David sent to his general Joab was equally deceitful, orchestrating Uriah's death in battle in such a way that it would appear to be an accident. Finally, David's feigned response to the news of Uriah's death reflects hardened, calculated deceit, as he said, in effect, "Don't let this thing discourage you." Literally, do not let it be evil in your sight. People on both sides get killed in war. Redouble your efforts and you will succeed. The wickedness of this response is as obvious as it is deceptive. People on both sides do get killed in battle, but soldiers are killed by the enemy, not by their king. Joab did need to resign himself to the vagaries of war, but not to the venalities of his king. Redoubling their efforts was irrelevant. Wow, yeah, so he literally put this together, put him on the front line so that he could be killed, right? And then he acted like, oh, they just needed more people on the front, to protect them and stuff. And it's like, that's not what they needed, but he got that focus off of him. Defeat in the previous battle was not the result of military failure by the general, but moral failure by the monarch. All reality had been veiled by David's fog of deception, but the fog lifted in the very last statement of the chapter. But the thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord. Those who deal with abusers must have the courage and wisdom to see through the fog and cling to the truth. Those who work with abusers must anticipate bold deceitfulness. One of Celestia, that's the author's wife, one of her earliest clients was a 3-year-old who had been referred by a local pastor. This girl came home from Sunday school one day and told her parents about a man at the church who was touching her. It turned out that a longtime elderly member of the church, a grandfather figure to most of the children, had been touching her in the church office while others were coming in and out of the office. He was deceitfully clever, so deceitfully clever that he was able to abuse the girl while appearing to be reading to her as she sat on his lap. The boldness of this abuser's deceit was seen in the fact that 1 week after his church confronted him, contacted the police, and forbid this man from having any contact with the children of the church, he visited another church less than a 5-minute drive from this one and offered to serve in the children's ministry. All right, so we learned you can't tell an abuser by how somebody looks. An abuser will deny responsibility. They will shift blame, anything to not be accountable. We have to keep putting the truth in front of these people so that they can hopefully come to the truth and the realization, right? And then be freed from what they're experiencing. A lot of abusers have experienced abuse, right? So they're just kind of acting like in the past. A lot of things that I repeated that I learned growing up, I didn't realize was not normal, right? So we want to keep bringing that truth, right? Truth sets us free. God is about truth, but in love, right? So we can do this lovingly. We don't have to scream. We don't have to be mean, but we can keep setting boundaries. We can keep speaking truth, and hopefully people wake up and they stop trying to get out of being accountable and stop shifting the blame. And then just bold deceitfulness. David wanted so badly to get out of this and not be caught that he was willing to do whatever it took, and he went slowly, and as things weren't working, he finally got to where he got rid of the problem, right? So I think that's where we will stop for today, because that was a lot of information. It was a lot of talking for me. And then tomorrow, I'll be back at 8:30, and we will go over, there's 2 more profiles that he goes over. Actually, it might be more than 2. But yeah, he'll go over that, and then he goes on to types of abusers, which I feel like we already went through, but he goes a little more in depth, and I think this is the triggering stuff that I had go on, so I'll see how much I go into with you guys. But I want to make sure you're getting the understanding of what he's talking about. But again, I don't want to sit here and really trigger people. You should be able to go at your pace. So again, if you want copies of these pages, I will send them to you. Let me know. And I want to say, one thing for me, we will, if we're raised in abusive situations, we will probably repeat some of the abuse, at least some of it, right? And we need to be accountable to that because we don't want to repeat it. And we want to have a healthy, I believe, we want to have a healthy compassion or empathy for even the abuser, right? Like God has helped me as I've gone through healing, like to be able to have some compassion towards those who have hurt me, because you need to forgive, right? So that's part of the forgiveness process, is also to have some compassion, like especially if you know things about your, people who have hurt you, if you know about their past and they've gone through things, doesn't excuse it or justify it. But it helps us have some compassion, because it's not hopeless for somebody who's abusing somebody, right? It's not hopeless for you. There's hope for you too. And God helps us to come out of that stuff, to see the truth, to not be deceived anymore, right? So even if, as we're going through this, we see that maybe we fit in some of this, don't freak out. It's okay. We can work through it. God wants to set us all free. And so this is definitely not a thing of like, let's come down on abusers and talk about how crappy they are. It is, let's heal what we've gone through, have compassion for others, even them, but also have healthy boundaries and speak truth, right? So it's this beautiful, healthy dynamic, which is what our goal is, right? So I see 8 of you stayed today. That's pretty cool. Again, for those who haven't been here before, if you go to my TikTok page, my YouTube link's there. I have a playlist on YouTube. I think it's called Inner Healing. So that's where all of these are, and you can see that we had gone through a bunch of the different types of abuse and stuff before we got to this chapter. So if you'd like to catch up, you can go ahead. But I'm on Tuesday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. Central Standard Time, and just sharing my journey of all the healing that I've gone through. And obviously things are still coming up at times, so sharing in the moment, healing with you guys. And healing's a great thing. That's all I know. And understanding, right? Getting knowledge is so helpful in healing, because then you have words to put to things that you're feeling, right? Like I just connected trauma bonding to what I was recently feeling. So it's so helpful. Again, truth sets you free, right? Knowledge and wisdom, good things. Okay, so I am so grateful that you joined today. I hope some of this was helpful. And I will be back tomorrow to see you guys in the morning. Okay? Bye, guys. Thank you so much.